All right, good afternoon. My name is Jonathan Stalling. I'm the interim dean of the David L. Boren College of International Studies here at the University of Oklahoma. I'm also the co-director of the Institute for U.S.-China Issues and the director of the Newman Prizes. And it is my great pleasure to introduce our guest of honor this evening, this afternoon, this 2025 laureate Ling Yu, coming to us from Taiwan, as well as a distinguished panel. We'll be discussing her work after a poetry reading. But before we do that, I wanted to just start with a few moments to reflect my personal gratitude and that of the University of Oklahoma to Harold J. and Ruth Newman, whose vision and generous gift made it possible for the Newman Prizes to exist at all, as well as the Institute for U.S.-China Issues in the Newman Chair. Harold Newman had a vision for U.S.-China relations and understood that for our two countries to traverse the next century, for the sake of the species and for the sake of the planet, some very difficult conversations were going to be necessary. Those will include security, right? Cyber, AI, emerging tech, ecology, climate change, a variety of public health issues, as we saw with the pandemic. The list goes on and on. Often the conversation starts in intractable positions. And so when you have critical and difficult conversations, it's ever more important to set a baseline. And the baseline is a recognition of our common humanity. What better way of doing that than to read one another's literature? So Harold Newman established this gift that made it possible for every 2 years the Newman Prize to be given to an author, either nominated for a particular work or for their lifetime of work, who exemplifies the human condition in its breadth and in its depth, its generality and its specificity. And over the last decade, these have included the first laureate, Mo Yan, who then a few years later went on to win the Nobel Prize for Chinese Literature, and most recently Zhang Guixing last time around, a Taiwanese novelist, but whose work focuses on Southeast Asia, especially Borneo. In every case, the author brings a vision of the world written in Sinophone, or in Chinese language, but representing a wide swath of the human experience, whether that be Taiwan or mainland China or outside in the diaspora. So it is, with a great deal of pride that, we have the Newman Chair for U.S.-China issues here. But I'd like to extend a moment of gratitude for Joellen Newman-Schomer, who is here representing the family, the Newman family. So thank you, Joellen. Next, we have a representative from TECO, which is Taiwan Economic and Cultural Office in Houston. Liam, if you'll raise your hand over here. Thank you very much. The streaming of this year's prize, both the poetry reading and roundtable that's happening now, as well as tomorrow evening's celebration banquet celebrating the conferral of the Newman Prize to Ling Yu, as well as the English Jueju prizes to winners across 6 different countries. That is all made possible by TECO. So thank you very much for making this possible for folks in Taiwan to also watch this in real time if they're awake. Not likely right now, but for tomorrow evening, I do believe it will be Saturday morning in Taiwan, so I hope we'll have a nice audience there. For all of you who are joining us online, thank you for joining us. For those who will watch this video as it's archived, we'll find links in the description to any other YouTube videos and so on that might talk about and discuss Ling Yu's work that might be brought up by our panelists. Next, I'd just like to take a moment to thank my own college, David L. Boren College of International Studies, because it is our amazing staff. So Jennifer Grover right over here, Stephanie Sager over here, as well as our Marcom team here, make it possible. So thank you to the University of Oklahoma for all the in-kind costs that it takes, the human time and interest and labor to make an event like this possible. So thank you as well. And thanks to our students. And again, our online guests. So without further ado, I'll be introducing briefly our panelists and our laureate to speak. So we'll be starting with a poetry reading by our laureate, Ling Yu. and she'll be joined by Professor Nicholas Wang from Hong Kong University, who is her translator and recently published a work which will be discussed, I'm sure, in the roundtable of the poet's work just months ago, hot off the press, as it were. So in the Q&A that follows, you're welcome to ask questions around translation craft as well as the two scholars who are here. So Nicholas Wang is also a scholar of Ling Yu's work and has published work in Chinese and English on her work. We're also joined by Professor Cosima Bruno, who is here from SOAS, which is a School of Oriental and Asian Studies, Oriental and African Studies at the University, or London University, schools, colleges, universities, coming to us from London, joining us for the roundtable discussion as well. So I'm going to hop out and invite our poet laureate to come and read a poem and the translator to translate. Thank you very much.
第一首诗我要朗诵的是松雪斋至黄公望。这里我们种下几棵松，雪下来的时候，我们建造一个书斋。我们向这里走来，我是其中最小的，一种伟岸的东西在发光，被我们的笔秘密包裹着。只要我们一提笔，就泄露出点点光芒。关于永恒的中锋、侧锋、焦墨、湿染，世界渐渐形成。我们的世界在密林中，在层层的峰峦，在靠海的江边，在幽深的竹手里，把自己抽出又置入。那独行者的手杖是我，那摧萎的树干是我，那岩石的缝隙是我的躲藏。如此，我虚虚实实取景描画，且生活在其中。如此，我学到了一点：我是且永是松雪斋中小学生。
Ling Yu says the first poem I'll read is Pine Snow Studio for Huang Gongwang. Here we plant a few pine trees. When it snows, we build a studio. We've walked over here. I am the youngest of all. A strapping forest beams at us, secretly contained in our brushes. When put to work, our brushes let slip a sliver of light. As for what lasts, brushwork, center tip, or side cut, dry or wet shading, the world comes into being, our world. In the thicket, in the undulating ridges, in the sea-bound riverbanks, in the deep and quiet bamboo groves, extracting, then embedding oneself. That lone traveler's cane is me, that towering tree trunk is me, that crevice in the rock is mine to hide in. Just like that, I dubiously find a view to paint and live inside. Just like that, I learn, I am, and will always be under Pine Snow Studios' tutelage.
女儿 X， 我在海边练诵《金刚经》，因无所住而生其心。我念诵给他，他们说这是回向。他被男人打败，卧床3年或30年，但他们蒙面，都站立床边，换了7个看护，但是一生的疾病还是被发明出来：糖尿病、高血压、忧郁症、呼吸道感染、骨折、褥疮、肌无力、白内障。医生搬出所有道具，鼻胃管、导尿管、氧气筒、注射筒、插管、气切。他一次一次被挽救，被打扮成太空战士，嘴巴紧闭，一只眼睛独自张开。不想看太清楚，我说，我想带你去看海，在海边你可以呼吸最后一口气。但我身为女人，我的嘴巴紧闭，来自于你的教导，只能假借《金刚经》，他们不知我在说什么。如此以心传心，微妙甚深的秘密法门。
Daughter X, I recite the Diamond Sutra by the sea. Develop a mind that abides in nothing. I recite this to her, to transfer merit, they said. Defeated by men, she was bedridden for 3 or 30 years, but the men were masked, standing by her bed. Changed nurses 7 times, but she could still invent illnesses worth a lifetime. Diabetes, hypertension, depression, upper respiratory infection, fracture, bed sore, myasthenia, cataract. The doctor carted out his props: feeding tube, catheter, oxygen tank, syringe, intubation, tracheotomy. She was saved again and again, decorated like a warrior in outer space. Her mouth zipped shut, with just one eye open. Don't feel like seeing clearly, I said. I want to bring you to see the sea. By the sea, you can breathe your last breath. But as a woman, I have zipped my mouth shut. You taught me well. I can only make use of the Diamond Sutra. They don't know what I'm talking about. To produce a tacit understanding, this secret way most deeply subtle.
然后，黑暗的楼梯我好喜欢。那个黑暗楼梯通往大稻埕繁华的宅邸，楼下摆满宴席，我们在2楼圆形廊柱间奔跑，一同指指点点，下面的客人带来欢乐，富贵气象。仆役穿梭着，端出热菜、汤圆、甜品，以及一些平时难得一见的精致食物。不是婚礼，该是因为战后陈平岁月多出来的一份闲情，例如一些节庆的借口，或者轮流做东的兄弟会。孩子们完全不理会这些，不明白战争是什么，筹作是什么，节庆是什么，只是高兴这么多人像为一出大戏而演出，盛装打扮，合宜的礼貌，酒不停供应，食物从厨房无止境出现。我们喜欢从1楼挣脱大人的叫喊，跑上2楼，俯瞰楼下的闹热，然后绕着内室的露台，再跑上3楼。在那里我们停下来， 我们看到那个黑暗的楼梯，暗的好像藏了更多的热闹。母亲和姑婆还有吃傻姑，他们在黑暗楼梯上坐着，说着小声小声的话，然后姑婆会流下眼泪，吃傻姑则愣愣笑着，然后我们会迅速变安静，偷偷坐一会儿，没让母亲发现，然后我们假意蹑手蹑脚又跳回楼下，不知谁带头爆笑开来，然后又在宴席中跑着追着，快速忘掉那个黑暗的楼梯。不久，姑婆和母亲会出现，他们重新补妆，头上插着红花，再配上珍珠项链，笑容灿烂，满桌的人都笑容灿烂。然后谁还会留在那个黑暗的楼梯
？And then later, a dark stairway. How I like that dark stairway, leading to Da Dao Cheng's bustling mansion. Banquet tables filled the floor, the ground floor. A floor above, we ran between the hallway columns, fussed over the guests, bringing joy and a prosperous air. Servants shuttled back and forth, serving hot dishes, tangyuan and dessert, and exquisite food rarely seen. It wasn't even a wedding, but post-war peace must have made us chill, ready to celebrate any red letter day or when frat groups take turns to host. Children paid these details no mind, not knowing what war meant, what exchanging toasts meant, what red letter days meant, only happiness, happy that so many showed up to put on this great show, rigged out in their best, suitably mannered, with bottomless booze, the kitchen producing endless food we enjoyed, escaping from the adults' stern voices and running upstairs to survey the din below, then running around the galleries before going to the third floor. There we stopped. We saw that dark stairway, its darkness bristling with more excitement. Mother and great aunt, along with silly aunt, sitting on the dark steps. Speaking softly, great aunt then started crying while silly aunt laughed rashly. We then fell silent, sat there in stealth. Not letting mother see us, we pretended to tiptoe away, bounced back downstairs. One of us let out a laugh. We then played catch around the banquet tables, quickly forgetting that dark stairway. Soon after, mother and great aunt came through with fresh makeup, with red flowers in their hair, decked out in pearl necklaces, smiling rapturously. The whole audience smiled rapturously, and then later, who would remain in that dark stairway?
第34次桥上的人们。21世纪整修中，优雅庄严将被消除殆尽。他这个工头从天庭下到人间，他在擘画，要把木桥变为高速公路，变为摩天大楼、购物中心，土丘变为兵工厂。今天他眺望，不是追悼，桥上的人们正在进行的承平岁月。其中一人是取经返程的唐僧，这位师父准备回到20世纪邻近的小城，吵来深处的家屋。天晴时他曝晒经典，他豢养白马，设想有一天把京都的图书馆充实。这座木桥即将消失，他看到那下缝 正在松开。他的唐僧师父有一脚就快要陷入那空洞，还好只是鞋底的灰尘掉落在即将行过的船棚上，而无人察觉。那凡尘在时代中纷纷扬扬，只是他知道他的唐僧师父活不过今天了。
34th station, the people on the bridge. The 21st century under renovation, its dignified elegance will be razed to the ground. He, a foreman, came to earth from heaven's court. He's orchestrating to convert the wooden bridge into a highway, into a skyscraper shopping center, a mound into a munitions factory. Today he looks afar. No, he's mourning the people on the bridge going about their blessed days. One of them is Tripitaka, returning from his pilgrimage for the Buddhist scriptures. This master is readying his return to the 20th century. The peaceful small town, his house deep in the fallow grasslands. On a sunny day, he would air the sutras, feed the white horse, dreaming that one day he could replenish the capital's library. This wooden bridge will disappear, he spots the widening crack. His master Tripitaka is about to sink his foot into that hole. Luckily, only dust from his shoe soles falls on the boat's canopy about to pass by, but no one notices. Such a mortal life fluttering through our times, only that he knows his master Tripitaka can't live past today. And this will be our last poem.
下午茶，我们对坐喝下午茶，在贵妇人的餐室。我看到我在你的杯子里非常滑嫩性感，穿着丝质的礼服，柔顺的那种，被你轻轻啜饮着。你喝到剩下一颗心脏，红色圆形，光彩夺目，像打过蜡。你把它留在里面。你一向把最重要的东西留在里面，这样我们就能继续话题，讨论一些无关紧要。注视着杯子的剩余，我们讨论一些无关紧要，那使我更加专注和自己说话。
Afternoon tea. Facing each other, we sip our afternoon tea in the dining room for ladies. I see myself in your cup, so smooth and sexy, wearing a silken dress, the supple kind, sipped at gently by you. You drank it until a heart remains, red, round, dazzling to the eyes, as if polished with wax. You keep it there, like always. You keep the most important things inside. This way we can keep to the subject, talk about pointless things. Staring at the dregs in the cup, we talk about pointless things. This was when I got hooked on talking to myself. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ron? Okay, great. Thank you so much for the beautiful reading and translations. I think we'll start with some prepared remarks from Professor Bruno, if that's okay. We have two scholars, again, as I mentioned, who have published work on Ling Yu's poetry and poetics. So, but while you're presenting your remarks, for the students that are joining us or others, please do think of questions to ask either the poet or translator or a scholar of Ling Yu's work. And I'm very much looking forward to that conversation. Without further ado, Professor Bruno.
Okay, hi everyone, and thank you for having me here. I think because they have read from the last two collections, I'm going to give instead a brief overview of Ling Yu's production, creation, perhaps starting from the beginning. And I would like to start from the context in which her poetry started to develop. And this context is of course, Taiwan's at the end of the 1980s, which was a period of time in which Taiwan saw a fast and well-defined political and economical development or shift. And so in the late 1980s, within this context of Taiwan changes in society, a new generation of poets emerged, and they gathered around a journal which was collectively run by Ling Yu, another famous poet, Xia Yu, and also Yung Manhan and Hong Hong and San Shu Mei. And this journal was called 现在诗, or Poetry Now, and was based in Taipei. And their production was really, I think, had a global sensibility because it had, referred or received the inspiration of their modernist predecessors, but also Chinese classical poetics and postmodernist poetry. And they decided to focus in the beginning on the contemporary society and on Taiwan national consciousness in a very experimental form, I believe, that basically raised or aimed to erase all boundaries also between medias and high literature or highbrow literature and popular literature. And their main aim was to reject the sublime or the central and normative, and try to break taboos, and so they subverted the referentiality of language and certain assumptions of poetry too. So as an important contemporary poet in Taiwan, Ling Yu is the author of many poetry collections and also the recipient of many literary awards. Her early poetry collection, Series on a City, was published in 1990, and then followed by Acrobat Family in 1996. And they present the contemporary urban space as enclosed and circled like a box, almost detached from the world. And with her characteristic, rational, calm style and dramatic narrative techniques that you had some taste just now, Ling Yu describes urban phenomena and human psychological changes, observing and criticizing consumers' culture and the process of constant pursuit, anxiety, and frustration. So for Acrobat Family, the poem Acrobat Family attracted quite a lot of critical attention and won in 1993 the Poetry of the Year Award for its originality, artistic innovation, and philosophical thinking. And it is quite an experimental collection, and the poem itself, I define it as kinesthetic poem because it's divided in 9 sections that about language, in which language is imbued, this verbal medium is imbued with movement. And so you have, again, as I said in the beginning, the space of the square or the air or the stairs, which are basically the playground where the performance takes place. The acrobats' movement and positions, the flexing and contracting of their bodies, straddle both measurement and struggle, human actions and existential reflection. And so we can have the formal position of an essential syntax and diction, and then we have also repetitive rhythm. Metonymically, all this kind of form captures the self-restrained movements of the acrobats and enhances the constant tension between the lyrical subject and the ritualism of their repeated actions. The theme and the setting may be reminiscent, I think, of absurd theater and also contemporary dance. The sections alternate scenes of physical containment and emotional yearning, stretching continuously between an excruciating spiritual search for perfection and the limitations of the earthbound body. We have the initial space is, as I said, the square, but this square is not an open space. It becomes narrower and narrower. We pass in following poems to upper space of emotional flights and embrace, flames, up to the last section where we see the subject that is trapped in a Escher-like scene of stairways and doors, only leading to more stairways and more doors. And the poem ends in the dark, where the subject resigns to fate and ties herself up with a rope. In 2019, as part of the Island Chanted in Poetry project, Fisfisa Media produced a short video featuring Ling Yu's recitation of this poem, but only sections 8 and 9, I think, and also an animated visual representation of these two sections. And it is available on YouTube, so if you haven't seen it, I recommend you to do so, because it's a really touching video. So how am I doing? Shall I continue with the next collections, or shall I just wrap up?
I think wrap up, but hold, because it might come into play, later on in the conversation.
Yes. I can just mention that the next collection after Acrobat family is called Mudong Odes, and it continues a little bit this theme, but it shifts from this dynamic performance to a more troubadour epic of an endless journey. And this is, a recurrent theme in this collection and in other poems by Ling Yu, the journey, but also the door, the journey that is intended in a more Taoist way. So it's departure, but also arrival, and so it's kind of cyclical event, and likewise the door and the mirror has this duplicity of the self, which however is not to be intended as just herself, but more as an entity that is in constant, entertains a constant dialogue with the other. And so to conclude, perhaps I can summarize by saying that one of the main concerns I can see in Ling Yu's poetry is the philosophical predicament of existence, which permutates in the motive of the travel, as well as those of the door, the mirror, the ladder, the physical efforts, the iterative and the performative. So performativity and staging are considered as pervading all aspects of life, even love in Ling Yu's poetry, which in a sense loses its purity and becomes an exaggerated effect under rituals. And so I think, I really recommend to read and study her poetry and work. That's it.
I wonder if we might just invite Professor Wang to reflect, as a scholar as well, writing about her work, of some of the themes that Professor Bruno is pointing to, or also themes that you found in it. Maybe just reflecting a little bit on your reading as a critical reader of her work. Maybe to talk about translation later, but yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of the philosophical meditation in Ling Yu's work comes from her reading of Taoist, Buddhist, as well as New Age philosophy that I think was introduced in Taiwan around the 1960s, or even probably earlier in the 50s. But I think she really thinks a lot about portals, gateways, ladders, ways of transcending illusion, human experience, to get to a larger form of reality, but then that reality is often cast in doubt. The way Ling Yu as a poet crafts this narrative of discovery is through storytelling and extracting it from classical tales, narratives that permeates human tradition across Chinese, Eastern cultures, as well as Western traditions, into really distinct and easy forms for people to understand. And so I think all of the poems are maybe 1 or 2 pages long. Even the poems I read about Huang Gongwang, the first one was really to think about calligraphy or ink painting, landscape painting, as a way of thinking about the human condition and human experience. So it is really easy to understand immediately, but then you're also left wanting, did I really understand what Ling Yu's poem was really about? So it really requires you to read it and let it simmer within your mind and your heart to ponder the human experience.
Would you mind translating this question? I'll say it in English first, which is, for Ling Yu to maybe talk a little bit about how she sees the function of the gateway, the different gateways in her poetry, just to talk a little bit about this theme.
觉得这个门上，或者是跨过一个门槛，对你的诗作有产生哪种作用呢？门这个意象。
可能是因为我对于空间有一种特殊的敏感，所以凡是跟空间有关的东西，我都特别的注意到。
She's especially sensitive to the idea of space.
所以我会描写门啊，或者是到了转换一个空间，那个空间 对我的产生的那种连结还有感觉，我就会把它写下来。
So she would depict doors and portals as a way of thinking about transformation in herself, and she would write this experience down.
Is it also something in the closed, empty space of these, maybe to reflect, how important is the emptiness of the portal?
空这个空虚概念在空间有，对你来说，
可能跟中国的佛学和道家有点关系。佛教还有道家，他们强调的就是空啦，或者是无。这个，因为我一向对这种神秘的哲学有点兴趣，所以我会特别的注意到空啦、无啦这样子的一种字眼。
She's influenced by esoteric philosophy within Buddhism and Taoism pertaining to concepts of emptiness and non-being, and therefore she would ponder on these issues.
Great. Thank you. Well, I think this is a good time to ask a question and jump into the conversation. I have a stack of them myself, but I don't want to be selfish. Well, this is an opportunity, but I'm not going to let that emptiness remain empty long. So I have a question about translation, if that's okay. I think it's actually probably relevant to both of you, but how do you find your way to a poet? What is it about a particular poet? Because translating a volume of work can take a very long time, especially in the pre-AI world. And it's a real commitment, and it isn't something you do lightly. I think writing an article as well is something, you might take 6 months or longer or a year thinking through, right? So what is it that draws you to a particular poet? And of course, there's a hidden piece of this is what drew you both to Ling Yu's work?
Actually, one of the series editors of the press, Ballister Press, reached out to me and asked, Ling Yu is looking for a translator. Would you like to be hers? And I was given a choice of a few other poets, but I picked her. So I shared this with Ling Yu yesterday, and she thought this was very serendipitous, that it must be something in the universe that brought us together. And I reflected on this because in my creative writing, as I write poetry, my aesthetics are radically different from Ling Yu's. I prefer more complex phrases and the use of wordplay, puns, whereas Ling Yu uses pared down language that is dense in its very simple expressions, more narrative driven. So I think we're sort of meeting midway, and I'm being transformed by her poetics, constantly reflecting what it means to write a poem succinctly as well as in a complex way.
Well, it's interesting because I use one of Ling Yu's poems in the past in one of my articles, but then I didn't know her until I attended a workshop. I participated at a workshop in Switzerland last year, where I was really captivated by her original and also complex kind of poetics, which seems, the language seems so precise, so simple sometimes, but in the same time it opens up so much. And so I translated one of her poems into Italian. Was entitled "Encounter with the serpent or with the snake," and And from there, I decided to know more about this poet's work. And I really thought that, through translation, you really understand so much more than just reading, simply reading, because you have to analyze and also think about the reason why that word is there rather than another one. And so I started reading, and I felt that all her those elements that connected her poetry to the Taiwan context really hit me very strongly, especially the esoteric side of her poetry. I found it very inspiring, and so yeah, that's how I reached her.
That's a wonderful story. So maybe we'll stay on this question of philosophy for a moment for another question for Ling Yu. I'm curious to know whether it's reading philosophy or whether it's reading poetry that exemplifies philosophical ideas like classical Chinese poetry. Where is the starting point for you and your interest in the philosophical concepts like emptiness and Taoism? And you mentioned Buddhist sutra a couple times. So where does that begin for you in your life? Where did you start becoming interested in this? From poetry or from philosophy or both?
大概意思是说，
你是从看诗或者是看就是哲学汲取了你这种对哲学的兴趣？
对，
什么时候你开始？
可能是在大学的时候，一方面也读诗，因为我特别喜欢陶渊明的诗。陶渊明的诗，它就是比较接近道家的思想。然后在大学的时候，那个时候在普遍台湾的大学，佛学社很盛行。那个时候的大学生很盛行，就是讨论一些佛学、哲学类的东西。可能我也受到影响，所以我就接触了一点佛教的经典，可能这样开始探索关于比较哲学性的议题。
So it's both. When I was in college, I enjoyed reading Tao Yuanming and the kind of Taoist philosophy embodied in the poetic works. Also in college, there were a lot of Buddhist reading groups and societies that introduced such philosophy to me, and that was how I started my journey into philosophical ideas.
And do you think there's something specific to the 现在诗 group, 你还有夏雨还有别的 who are interested in philosophy? Is there something about your generation that is drawn to some of these themes?
应该是很多，但是他们表现在诗里面就比较少。就是说喜欢哲学的很多，可是我的比如说现在诗的这个 group 感觉好像就没有。夏雨比较喜欢后现代的诗风，这样。那哲学性的就觉得比较少。对。
Right. So within that group, right, there's not. It's not a pervasive interest in it. There's more of an interest in postmodernism and experimental work. But for you, they come together. There's something, because it's a simpler approach, but as Professor Bruno is saying, you take a narrative to explore paradox, right, to explore the difficult philosophical concept. Did you find it, do you think that your poetry reaches a different kind of audience than Xiaoyu?
对，因为我 我读的是中文系，中文系读的都是古典的东西。那古典的中国的文学啦、艺术啦，对我们这一代要开始现代诗就有一种束缚，文字方面的束缚。那夏宇的后现代的诗风，就解构了我的中国古典文学的那种局限，所以我是有受到后现代诗风的影响。但是我感觉到后现代的诗风所带给我的比较属于技术性的练习，比较技术性练习，所以我受到很大，语言上受到很大的后现代诗风的影响。可是我没有办法一直玩后现代诗的那种游戏的性质，所以我在想，我有很多我内在的东西想表达的，所以那个语言的技术性的练习完成了之后，我在语言上就比较可以放得开，然后我就开始写我心里想写的诗，是这样子。
It's a lot, but maybe just a summary.
She graduated, I think her BA was in classical Chinese, or she did her grew up in the Chinese department and felt very constricted by the learning, but this getting involved in this poetry group, avant-garde poetry group with Xia Yu, has sort of taken apart the shackles of her learning, her classical learning. As for the information about postmodernism, whether she's really impacted by it, she uses some of the techniques, but I don't think she's really inclined to use a lot of the wordplay that some of her contemporaries do.
I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that distinction between a kind of formal experimentalism that might lead to collage techniques, more Dadaist approach to language, materiality, signification, very indeterminate in nature. Someone like Ye Mimi or others that are, as Xia Yu obviously is the most important example. And then Ling Yu is very different, right?
Yes.
But you're reading her as, leveraging narrative and symbolic language to sort of speak into the indeterminate, right, and the unknown, empty.
Yes.
So maybe you could talk a little bit about.
Yes, you put it really well. I shouldn't change your words, but yeah, you are right. I read it. I mean, I am a fan also of Xia Yu. I've written on her, but I was struck by Ling Yu's use of media as well, because as I said, for example, Acrobat Family is not just verbal media, it's kinesthetic. And then also in the latest collections, there is ekphrases, and she refers to paintings, she refers to philosophy and so on. But also I believe that it's her way of living. I don't know her very well because it's the first time that we meet, but in reading her poetry and in translating especially that poem, Encounter with the Snake, I thought that I could feel that is her way of living rather than applying philosophy or postmodernism or anything to poetry. Is very original also in that. So I think that there is the same kind of impulse in deconstructing language and in deconstructing the way that we represent reality, but in a very different way. Yes, you are absolutely spot on when you say that there is a different technique used in their poetry, but the results, I think, are not that distant from each other, perhaps.
Yeah. Well, I'm so sorry. I'm totally doing what I said I wouldn't do, right? I told you I had a stack, though, so just get those hands up, and I promise I'll yield. So, great, Wei Ning.
Yeah, so thank you very much for sharing the poems. So my question is for the prize winner, Ling Yu. So how did you manage to use very concise language to convey very philosophical thinkings behind your poems?
他的意思在说
文字很简练，怎么通过这种方式去表达很深奥的哲学理念呢？
这可能跟我写诗的习惯有点不太一样。我觉得我写诗好像是在对自己讲话，所以我比如说我喜欢某一个议题，我放在心里就是会放很久，然后可能经过1个月、2个月、3个月，我每天在家里做家事的时候，可能我在洗菜的时候，突然那个文字就会跑出来，所以我不是我自己去选择，那个文字跑出来是很自然的，好像是在对我自己讲话，所以很自然而然的，我不会用那种非常困难的句子来对我自己讲话，所以可以说我写的诗都是写给我自己的，所以我想它就会文字变得比较简练一点，所以我自己看得懂就好了，是这样。
So I write poems for myself. Oftentimes it's ruminating when I'm doing dishes, and then a phrase will come to me, and that's how I explore very difficult philosophical concepts. It's not a very arduous, painstaking way of writing, but just some inspiration that just comes.
I have a follow-up briefly question. How did your study of classical Chinese, Wenyan, influence your current writing? Is there a connecting point between, because you're unique because you spent a lot of time studying classical Chinese in an academic setting compared to the other Xinzai Shi, maybe they haven't this kind of study. How does classical Chinese influence your writing?
可能是这些传统的中国文学艺术的典籍对我的影响主要是在内容方面，还有它的广大的那种天地空间。另外因为我对他们的喜爱嘛，对于古典文学文人作家艺术家的喜爱，所以他们对我的影响比较接近于在内容方面。
So the influence of classical Chinese literature on me is on the level of content and stories, and the idea of how they embody space.
It looks like 2 questions over here. Okay.
All right. I have a question for those who do translation work. How easy or difficult do you find it to be to translate the emotional resonance of poetry from one language into another?
All right.
I opted for colloquial language in English because Ling Yu's poems are really about reaching someone on an emotional level. So oftentimes when I go over a draft, I have to fix it in the way of making it sound really natural in its storytelling and emotional register. So really thinking about idioms or things specific to English or the language that you translate into.
For me, I'm not a translator professional, but for me, poems, when I read them, I think how I can translate this. And if it comes You know, this translation comes to me with some interesting in interesting ways, then for me the job is done, you know. Other poems I can't translate, so that's why I can never be a professional translator, because if they would tell me, oh, you have to translate the whole selection, and then some poems I can't translate them, and I don't want to translate them. So it's really a kind of encounter as well. With the poem, with the poet, and yeah.
I think what you hear is a through line between these is that the translation is a kind of recognition of the poetic. So, you know, if you are using AI, it still takes a human sentient to recognize that it's poetic, because it doesn't know. And so a translator is the one who recognizes a resonance in the chamber of the heart, right? In this case of emotional resonance, it happens psychophysiologically, and you recognize it, and then you impart that recognition through a work of recrafting, right? And so I remember a particular image. You had sea-bound banks. It's a very unusual cleaving of words to refer to a river. And it may have been a direct translation because I was unable to do the comparison, but recognizing that confluence of unusual words as being something that produces a lyric effect in this case, something, you know, it strikes you as a kind of beauty that hits you, you know, in the heart. So it does, I think, often help if you're a careful reader, a recognizer of poetry, or if you're a writer, as Professor Wong, as Nicholas Wong is a poet himself. So as such, you know, when you write poems, you also don't know if it is one until you recognize that it is one. So the expressive part is down there, but then the discernment is that poetry. The poet decides that first, and then the reader and the translator, the editor, they're all resonators, right? So, yeah. We had another one here. Grace.
Hi. This question is for Ling Yu, but also the other panelists' view on that work. When you were discussing kind of the connection between like portals and doorways within your work and the use of space, but I remember this moment in the Zhonggucha where I believe there was that moment where the reflection in the tea. So I was wondering if that kind of connection between portals or other meaning is connected to like reflections and mirrors in your work.
就是在下午茶的时候有谈到这个喝茶，其实有一个镜子的意象，所以这个镜子跟门有什么关联呢？ So afternoon tea, 下午茶, right, is actually one of her newer poems. So I think it really is a very interesting question about poetics, whether talking to yourself via a tea or looking into the reflection in your glass is something. So.
我觉得他的问题问得不错，因为从读者的问题我才会发现到，原来我真的写了一些跟门有关的，还有跟镜子有关的，不只是一首两首，所以他的问题让我也有点吓一跳，的确是这样子，可是我没有意识到，可能是门它就是一个空间的转移的通道，还有镜子就是一种自我的镜像的反射，也许这些东西它跟空间还有跟其他哲学性的意义有关，所以我不知不觉的很自然的就拿它们来写诗。
This is an excellent question because I had really not thought about it until you asked me that my poems really uses images of doors and mirrors to reflect, but briefly, doors and portals are ways of switching between different spaces, and mirrors are a reflection of the self, but they have a kind of common ground of transforming you into different spaces.
If you could ask a question as a translator, what would be a general kind of questions you wish you was here to ask when you're translating?
I already did an email.
Yeah. So maybe give us a peek into the kinds of questions that you two discussed.
而且我们第一天也谈了很多。我们第一天见面的时候也谈了。
Yeah, when we met for the first time yesterday, we discussed extensively about philosophy, about use of language, and so maybe one question I can ask is, how did you get interested in the Japanese ukiyo-e prints, the second last poem about the people on the bridge? So there's a sequence in this book. 8 poems are about the Japanese prince, and so she's describing images not necessarily faithfully to what she sees, but creating a story behind it. So why these Japanese prints?
我写了很多跟画有关的诗，像肤色的时光这一整本的诗集里面，大概有很大部分的都是写画家，还有他们的画。那传统中国的画，很有名的就是长卷，很长的长卷。我一直很喜欢长卷的这个形式。那它的形式很像是看，长卷很像是一个电影影片一样的，这样展现出来。那当我看到日本的画家，就是歌川广重，他的画就是东海道53次，也是一个长卷，但是他这个长卷的画风跟中国长卷的画风有一些不同的地方。也就是说这个画家，这个日本画家，他已经是19世纪了的画家，所以他比较接近现代，就更能够引起我的共鸣了。它里面画的内容具有一点现代感，还有就是它里面画的内容很多都是画他所经过的庶民百姓的生活。那我很喜欢这一类的画，所以我看了以后就天天就放在我的案头上，然后我心里就想，我一定要为他写40首诗。可是呢，到最后我只能写出几首？9首？8、9首吧。对，好像是8首。但是我觉得已经可以了，能够把我想表达的在这8首里面表达出来，所以大概就是这样。
So the collection before this, Skin-Colored Time, pays homage to a lot of art and artists and intellectuals who write. One of the influences is the ink scroll paintings in Chinese tradition, which is similar to the Japanese print tradition. But what drew her to the latter is that they are closer to her age and resonated with her in terms of their depictions of hoi polloi and maybe common people, and so she has some of the paintings on her desk that she refers to. Initially, she wanted to write based on them 40 poems, but she only managed 8, and that's the story behind why she chose to write about the Japanese prince.
Well, I think we probably have time for a final question, if there is one from the audience. Still have my stack. Got about halfway through. I guess a Taiwan poetry question. You know, I wonder how much you work with the bookmaker. You have a Concordia book, right? To plan the kind of complex, must have a relationship to the ink scrolls, to the materiality of Taiwanese poetry is very particular. It must have some collaboration with book artists or others to envision the material artifact of your poems. How important is the material book itself for you?
详细的我就没有听很清楚。
对，你送给他的那一份那个折叠性的那一部诗集，你是否有跟其他的制作人合作，还是怎么样的一种流程呢？
好，那本长卷的诗集，是我特别跟那个出版社的人 publisher 要求的。因为我一直很喜欢中国传统的长卷的画，所以我就想我的诗集一定要做一本那种长卷的。那恰好是那本诗集是我在火车上面写了大概好几年2-3年的诗，几乎全部都是在火车上写的，所以那个长卷的形式也很像一列火车。然后我在安排的时候，有按照季节，春夏秋冬这样子，所以就做成了一个长卷的形式，就完成了我一直很希望出一本长卷的诗集的心愿。
She really wants to. Why she produces an accordion-like book is because she admires ink scroll paintings and wants one of her collections to be produced in this form. And so I think the collection pertains to trains, and so opening it up, it looks like different train compartments, and I think it's also organized according to the seasonal changes in the collection.
So for all of you who are at the University of Oklahoma, you can come and see the book in person at the Chinese Literature Translation Archive, along with other materials of Taiwanese women poets like Xia Yu, which we have a pretty extensive collection. So I invite you to see that. Will be there installed tomorrow, so from tomorrow forward. I should make a couple of announcements, for those of you who are online as well as those of you who are here. Next fall, Chinese Literature and Thought Today, which is the journal published out of the Institute for U.S.-China Issues, in partnership with the 21st Century China Center at University of California, San Diego, and supported by the Newman Chair, we'll have a special feature on Ling Yu's work, and we'll have contributions that you can read from both Professor Bruno and Professor Wang. New translations of Ling Yu's work, and other reflections, and an interview which we'll be conducting tomorrow. So, the conversation continues on the page, so just make sure to look out for that. There's also, for you online, a new price point, just $50 now for a subscription to the journal, and you can find that on our website. So maybe just one last question. I'm plugging things, right? So, of course, you've mentioned it, but this is, as I mentioned before, hot off the press. And you'll find it already on Amazon and other booksellers, or you can get it at the at Bellister itself, right, at the press, which is always kind of nice.
I think we have a few copies.
Yeah, and we have, for those of you who are in person, if you wanted to pick up a copy and get it signed, you can do that as well. And we'll have those tomorrow evening as well. Maybe one very, very last question. Why is poetry important for the world today, Ling Yu?
哇，这是个大问题。
I leave it to it. That wiped out my deck.
大问题。我好像曾经回答过这个问题。我个人认为了哈，诗是时代的脉搏，在我感觉，你想要了解这个时代、这个社会，最好去读诗吧，因为诗人他一定是跟这个时代、跟这个世界，就是时间和空间，他特别敏感。比如说像我就是这样，我所反映出来了，就是我在这个空间，还有我在这个时间里面的所思所感。 所以我觉得它最能够反映这个时代、这个空间、这个社会，的所有的可能是问题啦，或是思想啦、感情啦，所以我觉得一定要读诗。
Poetry reflects the pulse of our times, and so you have to read poetry to really understand what's going on in society. When you read my poetry, you can understand where the time and space of where the poems come from.
A great answer, and we'll leave it there. But if you're joining us online, please do so again tomorrow at 7 p.m. Central U.S. time for the banquet celebration of the laureate, Ling Yu, as well as the English Jueju winners. So I hope to see you there. And thank you for all of those who are in attendance, and please stick around for some further conversation. And I suppose that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.